All right, we are live on YouTube. Karen, when you are ready to begin.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, Restonians, and welcome to this comprehensive plan work session of the Board of Directors for Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. This is a virtual meeting. I'm Karen Anton, Reston Association President. I hereby call this meeting to order. We have quorum. First item is I would like approval of tonight's agenda. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Thank you, John. Do I have a second? I'll second. Okay, all those in favor? Any discussion first? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye from Tim.
Thank you, Tim. All right, the motion carries. Do we have any member comments this evening? Christina, has anyone signed up?
So no, nobody has signed up. But if anybody would like to raise their hand.
Right. Anyone would like to make a member comment? Just if you can raise your hand, if you go to the participants, I think that's where it is. Or just if I can see you, if your video is on, just raise your hand. Okay, not seeing anything. I will move on to the next item on the agenda.
Actually, it looks like there might be a hand from Susan.
Okay,
Shala.
whose hand?
I'm trying to unmute Steve and Susan Shala.
Okay. I see they're still muted.
So Steve and Susan, if you see the prompt that says unmute, you can click on that. Or you can also email boardofdirectors@reston.org.
There's trying to unmute, but saying they're not able to.
Okay, that was the only hand I actually saw.
Okay, I'm sorry, Steve and Susan Shola, we're not able to unmute you apparently. But please send your comments to boardofdirectors@reston.org. Okay, Michelle Kimmel has her hand up.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi. So we were having some trouble getting into the meeting. And one of the things that was of particular interest tonight was to hear the discussion about the repurposing.
Excuse me, Mr. Shola, for interrupting you, but I need you to state your name and address for the record, please.
It's Stephen Shola and Susan Shola at 2055 Golf Course Drive, Reston.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
And we had a very long delay in getting into the meeting. And I wanted to know, has the discussion occurred about potential repurposing of the new bridge pool? Our primary reason for attending tonight.
Could you repeat that, please? There was some audio interference there. I think you're showing up twice on my screen, once with your video and once a blank screen, so that might be part of the problem.
He asked if we have talked about repurposing the new bridge pool.
Ah, okay. Thank you, Jennifer.
So has that conversation occurred already?
It has not.
Thank you.
Indeed, it is not on the agenda.
Right, and it is not on tonight's agenda. Tonight's agenda is an information and work session about the Comprehensive Plan Task Force. Okay, Michelle Kimmel, did you have your hand up?
I did, yes.
Go ahead, please. Name and address.
Sure. Michelle Kimmel. My address is 1937 Upper Lake Drive. And I wanted to comment on one thing. I see that you will be discussing the notion that that Barron Cameron Park might be used instead of a park for the community as a sports tourism facility to generate additional revenue for Fairfax County. And I'm really glad to see that you're discussing this because, it's my understanding that one means of funding this would be by using the proffer money that has been contributed from developers in order to offset the impact that the added density has on our community. And, I think that this is absolutely an issue that RA needs to engage on because with greater density and more people here, they're going to need to use facilities. And if we take away the largest facility in Reston, the Barron Cameron Park, and we turn it into a facility that by definition, both current and future residents will not be able to use, it seems like that would be a really horrible use of our proper money. And it's especially an RA issue because if we can't use Barron Cameron Park, where is everyone going to go? RA facilities. And so that's going to increase the usage of our own facilities. And already we're being told that maintenance cannot be maintained. So I just think it would be beneficial to the entire community and to the association if RA advocated loudly in opposition to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. And I think there's somebody else had their hand up.
In a hand from Sarah Willis.
Sarah Willis,
Yes. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
we can.
Wonderful. And my address is 2115 Golf Course Drive. And I realize it's not on the agenda for tonight. And in a similar vein to Steve and Susan, I just purchased a home. My husband and I were sort of first-time home buyers and just moved to Reston, chose Reston for, the purposes of, the pools and the parks and the green space. And I joined the cluster board meeting last night and really I felt like it necessary to join this meeting to really make sure my voice was heard, to understand really what the process is for repurposing the New Bridge pool, understanding that the study that was conducted may or may not be telling the whole truth. I'd like to understand that sort of methodology and really what's been discussed. So wanted to make sure that my voice was heard as a new resident and wanting to get engaged on this issue. I'm sure like many residents in the New Bridge area that feel that it was critical to partly our decision for moving here, but it's also just a fabric of the community. So thanks for listening. And I know this can be a future topic on other board meetings.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
I would just like to remind everyone that the board has asked our Prc committee, which is our Park Recreation Advisory Committee, to have this on their work plan. So their next meeting is next Wednesday, the 23rd at 6:30. And there's a link to that meeting on the RA website under the calendar. So that would be a good place for people to share their thoughts on all facilities, and the board will take this up when it comes back from our committee. So it will be eventually on a future board meeting after it comes back from committee.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, if there's no more member comments, we can move on to our next item, which is the comprehensive plan revision. And I am going to turn this meeting over to our two board members and our COO. John Mooney and Jennifer Juszczyk are members of the task force, and our COO, Larry Butler, is also a member as an alternate, I believe. So they will be giving tonight's presentation. So take it away.
Thank you, Karen. And Christina, would you please put the PowerPoint up on the screen now?
Yes, 1 second.
Thank you.
Can you see that?
We can indeed. And could you move immediately to slide 2? Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We're very glad that you've come out to join us in this update on the very important topic of the Reston Comprehensive Plan revision, which has been underway since May of last year. The purpose of our work session tonight is to update the board and members about work that has already been done by the task force involved in the comprehensive plan revision, the work still to be completed. And I will say that we're trying to complete our work by the end of July. So it is indeed the imminence of that hoped for finish date that leads us to give this update at this point. Note that what we're going to be talking about is at a high level. We're not getting into smaller details. We are going to seek board guidance on selected issues. Those are issues where Jennifer and Larry and I think that we might be required within the task force to take positions, and we want to make sure that we have board guidance on it. The board tonight cannot give us a formal directive on anything, but they can say whether things look generally good or bad, and whether they foresee that we'll need to bring specific points to the board for approval before Jennifer, Larry, and I take our votes. So there are the overview tonight is we're having this PowerPoint. Then we're going to entertain questions and comments from the board after each slide. And there are 4 main topic areas in the PowerPoint itself. Why are we doing this update at all? What is the current comp plan process? What are the major comp plan components? And what are the upcoming comp plan meetings? After that, Supervisor Alcorn hopes to be joining us before 8 and is willing to answer any questions, and I think he hopes to stay for a while. Then we will have next brief comments from the authors of several of the draft comp plan chapters, which Jennifer, Larry, and I are going to try to go over in very summary form. And then finally, we will have a time for questions and comments from the Board of Director members and also from members of the Reston Association community. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this at all? Why are we doing this comp plan update? Well, it basically is because of the 2014-15 plan. It had some notable successes. It did provide a land use plan for the rather complicated and extensive developments in the TSA areas after the arrival of the Silver Line. And it laid a foundation for a roadway system to handle the growth caused by that additional development. And those transportation improvements are laid out in the Reston Network Analysis final report done in 2018. But the 2014 plan had some significant limitations too. So there were excessive densities in the view of many community members, including those of us who are serving on the task force in the name of the board, in the name of RA. There are excessive densities planned for both the transit station areas and the non-transit station areas. And those excessive densities create problems. And secondly, there was a minimal community process for the non-TSA areas. So they had a long process with a task force, community task force for the TSA areas, but not for the non-TSA areas. And some mistakes were made. Next slide, please. So the immediate stimulus for the comprehensive plan process was that in 2017 through early 2019, the county proposed to amend the Planned Residential Community, or PRC, zoning ordinance to increase the density there. Now, the PRC ordinance is the very unique ordinance, which governs those areas of Reston under the RA covenant. So Reston Association joined with a number of community groups, notably the Coalition for a Plan Reston, to resist this change and to argue that the underlying assumptions in the comprehensive plan itself were flawed. So there were problems with the zoning ordinance because the underlying comprehensive plan had flaws. And the county's Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors ultimately agreed and said that the PRC amendments should not be considered until there was a review of the comprehensive plan. And then on January 14th of 2020, in his very first meeting after his election, Supervisor Alcorn won the Board of Supervisors' approval to begin the current comprehensive plan review process. So there are, the task force started in May. We've had 24 full task force meetings as of earlier this week, as of yesterday, in fact. There are 31 total members and alternates. And as noted, Jennifer and I are full members, and Larry is my alternate. I want to stress, I want to stress that let me see here, that our discussion tonight is concerning texts which are not approved. Nothing that we're talking about has been finally approved. Some are in draft form, some are in very rough draft form, and even just outlines, and some, for example, the needed public facilities part hasn't even been begun. So we're doing this now because, not because we're at the end, but because the process toward the end is speeding up. And we want to make sure that we have community and especially board input on certain issues that we may have to decide on as representatives of RA on the task force. So the sequence of the revised comp plan approval from this point on is that we will probably be asked to vote on a draft of the complete plan sometime in late July or early August. Then there would be a county staff review of the draft. An initial estimate is that could take 5 to 6 weeks. Of course, that is flexible depending on what complications they encounter. Then Supervisor Alcorn has said that he wants to have a strong community engagement on the draft, probably in early fall, to get the community's input on it. Then he would, in late fall, recommend a draft, which would go next to the Fairfax County Planning Commission, which would hold public hearings and then make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, and that would happen probably in early 2022. And then finally, the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors will hold a public hearing and decision sometime in 2022. So at this point, let me pause and see whether there are any questions from our board members who are here. Any questions on these introductory matters? Okay, we can always return later if there are.
John, this is Bob Petrine. You said that the task force intends to finish its work by the end of July. Is that even possible, given that virtually everybody on the task force is a volunteer?
Good question, Bob. And the answer is we'll see. But Walter is very insistent that we do our best to do that. That's all I can say.
You also mentioned the issue of voting. What do you mean by? I'm always curious when somebody says they're going to vote on something. So, what will that entail?
So we're trying to work by consensus in the task force, I should say. But at certain points, and this has happened in the transportation committee, working on the transportation chapter, we did have some votes. We didn't come to consensus, so we had votes. So the goal is consensus, Bob, but we may have to vote on particular parts of each chapter and of the plan as a whole. And these simply mean these are our recommendations as a task force to Walter. Okay, it does not in any way approve either particular chapters or the entire plan. Does that make sense?
Yes. One last question, John. How has the recent change to the zoning ordinance impacted Reston as a planned residential community? Excuse me.
So the board had taken some positions on that during the run-up to the voting on phase 1 of the ZMOD project, as it's called, the zoning modernization project. The planned residential community zoning ordinance, as you well know, Bob, will not be undertaken until phase 2 of the ZMOD process. So we'll have to see what arises during phase 2. There were a few things that we as a board opposed in the phase 1 decisions that made it easier to have home-based businesses and to have residential units in existing residential structures. So we preferred for those provisions not to have been approved, but we were unable to persuade the Board of Supervisors.
Sorry, John, I've thought of one final question, and then I'll be quiet for a while. As it relates to the zoning ordinance, and particularly the part of the zoning ordinance which relates to Reston specifically, do you have a sense at this point of what possible changes could occur in the PRC zoning ordinance that would affect the entire planning process? It seems like we've got the cart before the horse in this case.
Obviously the focus from 2017 to early 2019 was on the zoning ordinance. But what we discovered as we had very detailed and frank conversations with Fairfax County is that what was causing many of the problems in the zoning ordinance had roots in the comprehensive plan itself, which is why the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, with our support, said they're not going to touch the zoning ordinance until we deal with potential problems, and we believe real problems, in the comprehensive plan. So we don't know what might happen with the the PRC zoning ordinance. We know that some in Fairfax County had raised the question whether that was a zoning district that had outlived its usefulness. We absolutely believe that is not the case, that Reston Association and Reston would not have been developed but for that planned residential community ordinance. Secondly, and more specifically, in 2017 and 19, there was a move to increase the allowed density, the overall density, overall general density for the PRC district to move from 13 persons per acre to as high as 16. And so that is one of the possible things that the county could seek. We hope that by dealing with density issues in the comprehensive plan, and Larry will go into that in a few minutes, by dealing with the density issues in the comprehensive plan, the press for that increase in the person per acre average in the PRC ordinance will be blunted. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I don't have a question. I just have a quick point. I wanted Larry and Hagen just to make a note. When the community engagement draft comes out, can we make sure that RA sends something out in our email blast, please? I'm sure I'll be around then. I don't know how I'll remember. So if you could just make a note, that'd be great. Thank you.
We'll make it happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Hank.
So if there are no more questions on the preliminary slides, I now turn it over to Larry to talk about the land use issues that we were just talking about. And again, I want to emphasize that the texts we're discussing tonight have not been approved, and many are in draft form or even pre-draft form. So nothing is fixed at this point. Okay, thank you.
All right, next slide, Christina, please. All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see so many people on the call here. I just want to reiterate what John said. What we're presenting tonight are some of the key issues that we believe the RA board may have to take a position on. And actually, in some of the later slides, you'll see a little footer on the bottom that says, does RA have a position on this? And so what we're really doing is, for the edification of the board, is to present these issues back so that when this comes up in the task force, and there's actually some draft language or positions on the task force, does the RA board of the community want to take a position? So we're just going to go over really high level what some of those major issues are. We'll go into a little bit of detail, but we've got a lot to cover tonight, and so we're not going to, I like to think we're not going to get into the weeds on them. So let me get started. As John alluded to, the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance are the two land use things that go hand in hand. The comprehensive plan is the guide, the zoning ordinance are the rules, the rule of law to implement the comprehensive plan. The PRC district, both in the former zoning ordinance and the new one, the planned districts, in particular the PRC district, there's very strong linkage between the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. Even to set up a PRC district, the master plan for that community is adopted into the comprehensive plan. That's why Reston is really kind of a special case in Fairfax County comprehensive plan, because it's really a requirement of both the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan that those two are married closely together. We want to make sure that marriage of those two remains in the comprehensive plan, and as John alluded to, in case two of the ZMOD piece, that there's a strong connection between the two. It makes this comprehensive planning process very important for the community. So let me touch on a couple of those key areas that we believe, and this is Jennifer, John, and I, who've kind of extracted from the multitude of things that have been discussed at the task force meetings. I think for those of you who have attended, you would probably acknowledge that. So we're just going to touch on some of the ones we think are most important. One of the ones that we've heard time and time again is village centers and convenience centers. What we're really talking about are the village centers, not including Lake Ann, which already has an approved comprehensive plan amendment that was done a number of years ago. We're talking about North Hills, South Lakes, and Hunter's Woods. And the discussion there has been, should future development be allowed or redevelopment at those village centers? And if so, what form should it take? Should it be only residential? What potential floor area ratio or density? It's going to come up in discussion. It's been touched on at the task force already. We don't have a draft to bring to you, but again, this is something that I give my opinion that I believe the board should weigh in on this ultimately, but have something to really react to. So this is one I'm quite certain we will want to bring forward to you. Similarly, there are convenience centers. Soapstone, Sunrise Valley, and interestingly enough, the convenience center at Lake Newport, which happens to be the lake house. That's how it is on the comprehensive plan. And so, you know, my recommendation is that that be changed to not be a convenience center, since I don't believe that anybody who lives around that lake would want that to be a convenience center. So again, that's something that we may want to bring back to the board, to recommendation back to the county that not go forward as a convenience center. Other properties that will come into play, many of you remember St. John's Wood.
Larry, sorry, can I ask a quick question? Can you tell us a little bit of pros and cons of having Lake House be a convenience center or not?
Well, it's now part of the RA's common area holdings. And if it stays as a convenience center, I guess it gives us the opportunity to do something different with it. The convenience center designation is locally serving retail. I don't know if that would be appropriate. And so again, I was giving you my opinion there, that I think removing that designation probably makes sense. Hopefully that answered your question. Going back to the other property, St. John's Wood, Charter Oaks, and the Home Depot area, which in the current comprehensive plan, there is not a strong option, but the potential perhaps for residential there. So these are areas where I believe the board may want to take a position on with respect to the comprehensive plan permit additional development in those locations. For instance, St. John's Wood, you may recall that there was additional density potential there, some language that was in the comprehensive plan. Should that comprehensive plan language remain? In addition, Charter Oaks and Home Depot. So we're going to take a close look at that language, and as that draft language comes out, we'll be bringing back to the board for consideration. Some big areas for consideration are Reston East, and that's the area that's really east of the transit-oriented development area of the Wheelie Metro Station. So think of, most of you are familiar with Campus Commons and that redevelopment. So you go east of there, road, there's a huge section of that TSA that is industrial and office park. But, you know, what should that be? Should there be redevelopment potential or not in that? And that's something that there's been some discussion at the task force. In fact, Virginia Tech students did a little case study on one of those areas. It was pretty interesting. So that's another area, because there's so much land and there's so much property there, additional potential to do something different with those areas. A really big one that obviously the association will be very involved in is Reston Town Center North. That property is approximately 47 acres, subject to the RA covenants. And so it has gone through the DRB. I believe it's coming back to the Design Review Board in July. And I'm going to be able to verify that later. The current comprehensive plan language for Reston Town Center North says there'll be a minimum of 1,000 residential units. That's not really good planning. It's just, you know, typically when you put in comprehensive plan language, you have a max of the density, not a minimum, like a minimum requirement. We'll want to take a hard look at that. And I know that Supervisor Alcorn has fairly specific ideas about that, some of which I think will come forward as the process unfolds with the design review board and then what follows that. Another item, and again, this is something Supervisor Alcorn brought up fairly early on in the task force meeting, was repurposing old office parks. Not just the office parks down Sunrise Valley or Reston East, but there's others in Reston. County staff is working on a map of that right now. Do these office parks remain as they are, or should they be permitted under different scenarios to develop into something else? And I'm not saying what that something else is. It's something that the community is certainly going to want to weigh in on.
Larry, quick question. You mentioned Town Center North comes under RA covenants. How about Reston East? Does it come under our covenants or no?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
So the key element in all these is that drivers on density, and density drives transportation, the need for parks, schools, other public resources. John Carter, our planning commissioner Carter, John Mooney and I worked very closely with county staff looking at numbers. What was the potential existing comprehensive plan? We looked at that. We got roughly 70,000 in the kind of the one Reston. But if you look at the existing comprehensive plan and you take the highest residential, so there's options on these different properties as written into the comprehensive plan. If you take the highest residential, that population could be 158,000 in 2050. Look at the least residential part of that. In other words, the more commercial aspect of all those, potential land bases and so forth, population is about 128,000. So this range of 128, 158 of potential in the existing plan. The density on all these different land bases throughout the community provides so many other considerations for the community. Again, transportation being a really, really important one. But I do want to thank the county staff because they did a lot of analysis looking at what the specific plan potential was on a land bay by land bay basis to help get to those numbers. So again, I just want to, these are just high level land use issues that I think the board may want to weigh in on. Again, we don't have specific language. The last 2 or 3 task force meetings, Commissioner Carter has led some very kind of specific discussions on some of these land bays. We really don't have any draft language to bring forward yet, but hopefully in the very near future with a deadline at the end of July, we'll see that. That's my report out on this slide. And again, these are things, should the board take a position on these. But I think, John, what you want to do is, if there's any questions on a particular slide from the board.
You're muted, John.
Thank you, Larry. Yes, this is the time for the board members to ask any questions, but before they do so, I would like to stress what Larry said in number 5, that these key land use issues detailed here are really the drivers on the density, and that creates that increases the population. And to go back to Bob Petrine's earlier point, that is what creates real or assumed pressure to increase the planned residential community ordinance zoning cap. So this is extremely, extremely important stuff right here. And Larry and I can give you more details than you'd ever want on these issues, including the quantification of these numbers. So I'll be quiet now and entertain board questions or comments.
I'd be interested in what other board members' opinions are of these issues. I'd be happy to share mine, but but I'd like to hear what everybody else thinks about it. Okay. Being none, I'll charge right in.
Bob, I'll take a quick crack at just one of the points when we're talking about, if that's okay. The village centers, when we're talking about, and again, I'm closest to South Lakes. Like, I don't see that being a conversation anytime soon because it's one of the most bustling centers. So Larry, what kind of, do we get a crack at this in 5 years when we look at the comprehensive plan again? Or is this sort of, how urgent are these issues to be addressed?
Well, I think the urgency is that if somebody wanted to come in within 5 years and, to change the comprehensive plan, the supervisor at the time has to support a comprehensive plan amendment. And specific language in the plan that guides redevelopment, then I would suspect that the owner could come in and under those redevelopment tenets, apply for that without doing a comprehensive plan amendment. So the question, I guess, really is, would the community support any redevelopment whatsoever, or just none? And that's really what it comes down to. And I want to point out, I didn't make this in my opening comments about this, is that after the PRC district discussions that John referenced, 2017 to 2019, we did get the county to acknowledge that we're only talking about the commercial area, because the village center rezonings and development plans was larger than the commercial areas. It included existing residential like Harbor Point and Throw Place across South Lakes Drive from the village center. But what the county was talking about was specifically the existing commercial and the potential redevelopment there.
So just to clarify for me, so as it stands right now, they cannot redevelop the village centers. Am I right? They would have to go through the process of getting a change.
I've got to go back. Maybe Bob Petrine knows this. I can't remember if the language was so specific that they needed a comp plan amendment, because I think
No.
Existing comprehensive plan, they don't need to get a comprehensive plan amendment. They just need to go through a planning process.
That's correct. If
I agree, and perhaps we will ask Chris Caperton, who's here from Fairfax County Planning Department. But if I may first respond to you in two ways, I think there are two reasons why we can't wait for 5 years. One is that I anticipate there will be pressure from developers to deal, as soon as we finish this comprehensive plan revision, to deal with the proposed PRC ordinance amendment. And so that will come upon us without having had the benefits of if we do not address it now, the danger is that the PRC ordinance decision would be made without it. Secondly, we do not know what kind of comprehensive plan review will happen in 5 years. In fact, frequently the time between reviews is more than 5 years, and this has been a breathtaking review, which Supervisor Alcorn has made really a community-based review. And we are not guaranteed this kind of thorough community-based review in subsequent reiterations of the comprehensive plan. Does that make sense, Sarah?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm on the DRB meeting on the other line.
Chris, do you have anything to add, Chris Caperton?
Thanks, John. Chris Caperton, Deputy Director with the Department of Planning and Development. I don't want to speak to the first point. I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough. I would sort of defer to the supervisor. Totally agree with the second. We don't schedule the plan to be open on a regular basis at this scale. The supervisor can always call for a plan amendment. The plan can be opened up for different circumstances. And as you know, we have a sort of a South County, North County plan amendment process underway. We're always looking to make those processes more efficient and more user-friendly, but there's no guarantees. The state ordinance says that we need to, make sure that the plan is reviewed on a regular basis. And I think that everyone would agree that Fairfax County does that. The plan is very dynamic, but the timing of plan amendments is hard to predict. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Chris.
Hey, John?
Yes. Is that Tim?
Yes, it is. I just wanted to respond to Bob's question very quickly. I come at this with a strong presumption against increasing density. I come at all of these issues with a strong presumption against increasing density in Reston. I come at them with an open mind. If somebody can make an extraordinarily compelling case as to why increasing density would be good for Reston Association and our membership, I will listen. But my starting point is a strong presumption against increasing density. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
I have a question for Larry.
Sure.
Okay. Larry, I know when you talked about number 4, repurposing old office parks, you said several things had been discussed, and I'm curious as to what some of those things are. I know I've heard Supervisor Alcorn in the past talk about affordable housing as a possibility. Can you talk about the things that have been suggested?
Well, I think the affordable housing being one of them, educational facilities being another, and just straight residential as well, which I know is probably not a very popular notion. But those are the three that I've heard referenced in the various meetings. And there are probably others that I've missed, but those are the three most prominent ones. And I think part of that, stems from the fact that there's a fair number of those office buildings that have been mostly vacated and may continue to be vacated with the new telework options, or mostly vacated.
Right.
That Walter's brought up a number of times, and I think when he gets on this evening, that might be a good question for him.
Thanks. I will remember that.
So if there's no more questions on this, we move on to the next slide.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question to Karen? When they repurpose office parks, are we talking about keeping sort of the existing structures and just renovating internal space, or are we knock down the whole thing and build high rises?
I think it's all of the above.
Okay.
I mean, I think in the discussions I've had, the initial context was just repurposing, taking the building and repurposing it. But, for instance, with the Virginia Tech students, they looked at a section over off Sunrise Valley Drive, and they came up with a, kind of a separate mixed use development. I mean, this was a scholastic exercise, but it was quite interesting, to bring in some additional retail and some additional residential and some of the office. So it was kind of a mixed use pod, if you will.
But there's two ways to look at this, right? One, it could be something really cool like the Torpedo Factory and have artist spaces and, affordable, really affordable. Or it could just translate to TSAs, high rises with workforce living. So I think the devil's in the details, but thank you, Larry.
Absolutely.
given the details, I think it's very useful to keep in mind that each property has an existing zoning attached to it. So whatever it's currently zoned as is since it is private property, can be developed up to the maximum that its current zoning permits. If it steps out of that, then it has to seek through the county a zoning exception or exclusion, or go through a process to change that zone. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, keep in mind that once the zoning changes, there is no, at least I'm not aware of any sunset provision. So if you step up the zoning from, or change the zoning from commercial property to high-rise residential, that zoning, once it is approved, stays with the property until it is changed. There isn't a sunset provision. So those are really very important things to consider. And if one of those was to be approved in a PRC, as it now stands, as John already mentioned, the density requirement might be a block against it. And I think it's very useful for people to remember, once something is, keep in mind, once something's built, it's going back to what it was before is not going to happen. So there are a lot of moving parts. It's
Is somebody speaking?
I think Bob tailed off for some reason. Maybe we should.
Oh, he's frozen up. Okay.
Yeah.
Right now.
Are we ready to proceed to the next slide?
We are, and yes, as I mentioned, we also, Director Juszczyk is also going to be presenting tonight. So Jennifer, whenever, I don't know how the three of you planned this, but
Karen, I think she logged off too. She's not on here either.
Water is an issue.
At least I don't see her in the participant list.
Okay. Are people having technical problems tonight? I don't know. Okay, well, I'm assuming that she will come back and get involved. Okay.
So why don't we move on to the transportation piece? John is going to do that one.
Just one moment, please.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next slide, please. Thank you for letting me take care of something there. So one of the major planning components is the transportation chapter. And in a phrase, the goal of our chapter is to have a connected, balanced, multimodal transportation system. And what's important there is we want better connectivity. There is disconnectivity within modes of transportation. So for example, there are discontinuities in our sidewalk system, and in our trail system for bikers and walkers. There is lack of connectivity frequently between other modes and, say, the transit station area. It's hard to get people to the transit to the metro rail stations. We need to make sure that we have good connectivity from neighborhoods, especially with lower income families who may not have cars, so that they have good bus service and connection to both shopping centers, but also to things like the metro. Secondly, it needs to be balanced. So multimodal means many modes of traveling. And so it's pedestrians, it's bicyclists, it's private autos, it's metro rail, it's buses. And so we need to make sure all of those modes are working, that they're connected, and that they're balanced. I would say most of the discussion and friendly debate in the transportation chapter has occurred trying to say what that balance is. On the one hand, we have the policy statement by Fairfax County that they want to reduce dependence on single occupancy vehicles because of environmental and community health impacts. And yet, we also want to be sure that people who still choose to use autos can do that too. And balancing that is a real trick. And it has to be equitable. Again, it has to be equitable for people of all ages, all levels of physical ability, all levels of where they live, and if I haven't said this already, their economic status, and whether they frankly choose to own and use an auto. On the other hand, we don't want to force a reduced dependence on single occupancy vehicles by coercion. We rather want to do it by providing attractive alternatives to single occupancy vehicles. So much of our discussion at many levels has been trying to deal with this goal, this noble goal of having good connectivity and a balanced multimodal transportation system. And again, those are obviously competing values, and the solutions have to be very carefully weighed out. There's concern about the impacts on business, for example. What if we reduce reliance on autos? Will that hurt business? There are many in the task force who are concerned about that. There are others who emphasize maintaining personal modal choice, that if I want to use a car, I should be able to do it, especially if I'm an older person who finds it hard to walk down to the bus station, to the bus stop. So that has preoccupied us throughout our discussions. Some of the proposed solutions, especially, solutions to congestion, solutions to unbalanced multimodal system have been discussed, and what we have here are 5 listed out. One is major roadway improvements. These came out of the Reston network analysis whose final report was in 2018, and that was based on the comprehensive plan itself. So it had major roadway improvements. They are listed in we won't go into all of them, but they're listed on the street recommendation handout that is part of the board package tonight. But there are problems with some of them. So for example, at the intersection of Fairfax County Parkway and Sunset Hills, there's a proposed grade separated intersection there to help the safe and convenient and quick flow of traffic onto and off of Fairfax County Parkway. And one of the problems is that our community in the polo fields is very concerned about this because it would significantly disrupt the properties in their area. So this is something that has not been decided. It was on the list proposed in 2018 in that Reston network analysis, but and it's tentatively on the list of the task force for major roadway improvements to be endorsed again. But we need to listen to the concerns of that community. There are concerns of other communities. For example, South Lake residents are concerned about the Wheelie corridor and what's happening there. So that whole set of roadway improvement issues. Secondly, in order to try to make the roadways and adjoining bike trails and pedestrian trails safer and more attractive, there's been a proposal to lower speed limits. So for example, roads like, they're called minor arterials, Reston Parkway and Barron Cameron. Currently Reston Parkway is 40 miles an hour and Barron Cameron is 45 to 40. There's a proposal that be reduced to 35, that minor arterials like Wheelie Avenue, Sunset Hills Road, Sunrise Valley Drive, Town Center Parkway, and so forth, go down to 30, and so forth. So this is an effort to try to get that balance, but is this acceptable? You know, can we make this case in the face of drivers of single occupancy vehicles who want higher speeds? I mentioned already that we're trying to improve pedestrian and bike connection. Thanks to our wonderful Multimodal Transportation Advisory Committee, MTAC, we have ROFAB, Reston on Foot and Bike, which points out broken connections or missing connections for pedestrians and bicycles. So we're trying to improve that. And again, we're trying to improve public transit. If public transit is attractive, reliable, affordable, more people would take it, and convenient. So how do we do that? And finally, there's transportation demand management. We've asked the county to do modeling of congestion from TSA development on non-TSA intersections. So the 2018 Reston Network Analysis studied the impact of TSA development's congestion on TSA intersections, but nothing was studied about the impact on non-TSA intersections in the rest of Reston. So we're pressing for that. And finally, there's a search for having the proper parking ratios. So one method used by many municipalities throughout the country in order to reduce the reliance on single occupancy vehicles is to require lower parking ratios, especially in highly urbanized areas. So we've had a lot of discussion on this, and nothing is sure where we're going to end up. One of the things that we have gained from Fairfax County DOT very recently is an agreement to looking at increased minimum parking ratios for big multifamily developments in remote areas of the TSAs, which are so far from the transit, from the metro station, that it's unlikely that people will use a metro rail and instead would probably rely on their cars. Therefore, rather than having lower parking ratios to encourage the use of metro rail, we're probably they're willing to look at increasing the minimum parking ratios because of probable greater reliance on autos. And finally, a big thing that we're looking at is placemaking. And placemaking means that by good design of streets, by street trees, by signage, by attention to making our roadways beautiful and what surrounds them beautiful, that we can make it more pleasant for people to walk and to bike. besides beautifying the community in general. So those are the major issues we're dealing with under transportation. Any questions? I'm curious what you all think about speed limits.
Can I ask a quick question if nobody else is?
Sure.
That I'm sure you've probably talked about this, and I see you have a chapter on equity on the overall comp plan.
Right.
But some of the things, and I keep going back to Singapore and referring to Singapore on this because they do a fantastic job with their planning. They take into account even small things like neighborhoods which have more seniors living, and even your road pedestrian crossings are timed accordingly. There are little things taken into account like more children, areas where kids cross frequently, or child service. So are we taking any of those things, looking at minority neighborhoods where public transport, there's a higher need for public transport?
So I would say, Sarah, very definitely on your last point. So very definitely looking at economically more modest communities within the Reston area, that where you would have a higher incidence of non-auto ownership. We're very, very keen on that. We want to make sure that we have good pedestrian and bike connections to bus stops, and that we have good and attractive and reliable bus service that is efficient and helps them get to work on time. We've all heard stories about people who can't afford cars who have to spend 2 and 3 hours getting to work in the morning. That is not an equitable transportation system. So we have focused especially on that latter thing. On the granular attunement of equity to the percentage of old folks living in an area. Speaking as an old folk,
I don't think of you as old folks. I wasn't talking about you at all.
You're very kind. But anyway, we have not gone to that granular level, but we have definitely looked at economically more modest areas of Reston.
Specifically, a suggestion is like the Fellowship House, and there's a little traffic light where they have to cross to get to Lake Ann Center. Just the timing on that, like little things like that would be, again, just feedback. I don't know if.
Hey, John, Sarah,
Yeah.
It's Walter Alcorn. Sarah, it's a great question. Hi there. And actually, I see Michelle Kimmel's on here. She might be able to address this more. She's pretty much leading the equity subgroup. But the way that the equity subgroup has been talking about this with Carla Bruce, who's the county's chief equity officer, it's frankly getting new data and understanding the demographics of different communities within Reston, so that those decisions and basically those extra efforts could be made to address them. And it in many cases, communities change and evolve, and so getting data that actually will help underscore that, I think, is really important.
Sure.
I just want to say thank you for being here, Supervisor Alcorn. I was going to introduce you, but we really appreciate it. I know you were juggling meetings and.
No, I am, and I'm just going to lurk. But if anybody has any questions, I'm just going to be watching. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I may, I just would like to personally say how deeply invested at great cost to himself and staff Walter has been on this, and how patient he has been, and how he has really let the community speak without any constraints about their concerns in this. It has been truly a community process. So thank you, Walter.
Thank you, John.
Any other questions on transportation?
I just was hoping that Director Juszczyk would be participating in this discussion. I'm not sure what happened. I've asked her to please rejoin, but
Okay. Well, why don't we proceed, and Larry and I or others from the task force can perhaps make it through the slides Jennifer is going to deal with.
okay, thank you, John.
Next slide, please.
All righty, John, we'll be doing tag team here. So we're going to talk about parks and open space, obviously a very important piece of Reston and Reston's fabric. And again, I'll probably say this on all the slides is, you know, should RA at some point take a position on these various high-level pieces? So the parks and open space piece, there's, when we talk about within the TSAs and outside the TSAs, or the rest of Reston, which is mostly the RA Reston, it's focusing on what should be in each. So the rest of Reston, or RA Reston, has a very robust park system. And a lot of the discussion at the task force has been, we need more of that in the TSAs. And, you know, to date, the only major park commitment that has come through the rezoning process is the synthetic turf field and adjoining parkland over at Isaac Newton Square. Most of the other entitlements that have come through since 2015 are, you know, very urban parks, small, you know, I know people love this term pocket parks and the like. And so there's been some discussion about, you know, how do we get larger park spaces within the TSAs? Now we know, and maybe Walter will want to address this, that in Reston Town Center North, there's been a lot of discussion about the civic space, park space there, and that's you know, that's an evolving piece. But you know, frankly, I'm less concerned about that one than I am, you know, some of the other TSA properties where there's no what I would call really meaningful public park space. So again, more detail, and I should also point out that in the current draft for the Parks and Open Space section, it's really kind of a blend of all of Reston in one context. The current plan, it speaks to the TSA parkland differently than sort of the rest of Reston parkland. And so they're sort of merging the two. And I think the intent behind that is that parkland is important at the same level, regardless of where in Reston you are located. So a couple of the other, I would say we're going to get a little more specific on facilities here that have been referenced in the prior plan and the current plan is the indoor recreation center, for which there's a 90,000 square foot proper in Reston Town Center North. And, you know, I think that's, we're the only supervisory district that does not have a county run rec center. Don't know the reason why. Some speculate it might be that the YMCA sits on county property, but that fact remains. And so there is that 90,000 square foot commitment. And I do not know, you know, what that looks like. Again, that's down the pike a ways. Also an arts and performing arts venue, for which right now, I think through 2022, there is a commitment of the Reston Next or Reston Gateway Boston property project. And there's been a lot of discussion about that at the task force as well. That really is a county-wide thing and not necessarily a specific Reston, and shouldn't come on the boot heels of just Restonians. And so again, we don't have a whole lot of more detail about that, but it is listed in the current comp plan as well as in what is the current draft for the Parks and Rec section. Now, the next one, I was asked by Director D'Souza to speak a little bit more to Barron Cameron Park. For those of you who know, that's about a 65 acre park, the intersection of Wheelie and Barron Cameron. It has an adopted master plan to put synthetic lighted turf fields, I think 8 up there. And it also has an option for an indoor facility. It's also the subject of a number of recommendations from the Sports Tourism Task Force. It's a priority for a new indoor court facility with 12 courts. also a priority for a new indoor track facility, as well as a combination of those two things. That's a much lower priority, at least from that report, for a natatorium or an Olympic size spectator swim venue. And one of the other recommendations that I think Michelle Kimmel brought this up in member comments at the beginning of this meeting is to provide priority booking to non-local tournaments and local tournaments and events. And that the tier 3 of the 3 tiers for booking use there would be local use. I know that's a lot of concern that has been brought up and discussed about what does that really mean and how will that take form. Because it has an adopted master plan, the question I don't know, and I think, and perhaps Walter can answer this, and appreciate you being on the meeting tonight, Walter, is how does the Sports Tourism Task Force recommendations, how does it implicate the current master plan for Barron Cameron, and would that have to go through a remaster planning process or not? And maybe that's a question for Bill Bowie and the Park Authority, but I thought I'd go ahead and ask that because the current master plan, adopted master plan for that seems like some of what was recommended in the Sports Tourism Task Force report would fit, but not necessarily all of it. And
yeah, Larry, I think certainly for anything that's a facility improvement that's not included or anticipated in the adopted master plan for the park would have to come back through the master plan process. So, I think some of that is also a programmatic decision that wouldn't necessarily go into a comprehensive plan or even a park master plan. But certainly anything that's facility related would have to come back through the process.
Okay, thank you, Walter. And currently I know the proffer monies or the proffer commitments that have come forward to the Park Authority in Reston, I know that they are working on the engineering for that right now, at least for the current master plan. I haven't heard anything differently that they're redesigning it for something recommended by the Sports Tourism Task Force, because that has a much higher dollar cost than just putting the synthetic lighted fields in that the current master plan calls for. So again, that's something we could probably follow up with Mr. Bowie on. So another question that has come up is the number of ball fields and where.
Larry, before we jump to the next, I have a bunch of questions on Barron Cameron, and since we have Walter here. Concern is this is not found on the Hunter Mill page, but found on the Springfield page, and there's varying there's no clarity on, because we've heard it's in the engineering phase, which if it's in engineering means it's a lot closer than, something down the road. The other concern, at least for us as RA, is what does this mean for our members? What does this translate to our community? I know it doesn't come under our covenanted, we don't come under RA covenants, but it does have a huge impact on all of our members. So is this something we want to be paying attention to? Do we want to actually take on an advocacy role? How do we want to, as a board, deal with this? Because one of the suggestions would be, we have the Sports Council. We are biggest player in the rec facilities in Reston. Do we get all of them together and say, this is happening? How do we advocate for ourselves?
Yeah, Sarah, I mean, it's your call, but I think one of the biggest potential impacts to RA would be as RA steward of Brown's Chapel, which is immediately adjacent. And I would suggest maybe, coordinating with the Park Authority on basically what are RA's long-term plans for Brown's Chapel and how that fits with what's going to happen at Barron Cameron. So because they are connected, there's woods in between, but there are trails and other ways. I would suggest, that's probably a good place to start. And certainly, in terms of the availability of fields, that's definitely something to talk with the Park Authority about too.
So Walter, what are you seeing this open in 5 years or 10 years? Are we talking about, is it?
Well, it's not
Right now.
funded. I mean, the preliminary engineering is going forward.
Okay.
But that's really just, the first part of a much larger amount of funding that's going to happen. So, yeah, we would have to see funding. So it would be probably at a minimum. I mean, if lightning struck and all of a sudden, money was found, that's 4 or 5 years down the road. More likely, we're looking at something 10 to 20 years down the road. And frankly, for complete build out might even be more.
And to answer Michelle's question that she brought up about the proffers, could you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, there have been a number of projects that approved before I became supervisor that proffer money to the park authority. There are a couple of levels of development proffer money that go to the park authority. Some of it it depends on what a developer is doing on site, so it does vary in terms of how much money is committed. That money only shows up when stuff gets built, and typically the money is not sent by the developer until issuance of either a residential use permit or a non-residential use permit. So basically when buildings are occupied. And in a number of the projects that were approved, they include multiple phases. So there are also times when, the trigger for the proffer contribution doesn't happen until, into phase 2 or, after the project is well underway. So that's, again, a matter of, years, most likely decades before that money shows up. So that's especially if you look at how much has already been approved, how much has already been rezoned in the last 4 or 5 years. We're talking, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 million square feet of development. And that's going to take an awful long time. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's going to take a long time for that amount of development to be absorbed if it ever gets built, frankly.
And are you thinking most of the proffer money that's how we would fund this facility when it happens? Because I think that was what our members were getting at, is should the proffer monies from Reston benefit a facility that our members would never get to use? And they're not saying don't build it. I think they're just saying give us priority.
Well,
in Reston.
Frankly, it cuts the other way too, with RA facilities only being available to Reston residents. These would be available to all county residents. So, in terms of the programming, in terms of, that's probably something, it wouldn't hurt to have somebody from the Athletic Council come talk to RA to actually, talk through those plans, because the Sports Tourism Task Force is still, it's still conceptual in terms of its recommendations at this point. Nothing's come to the Board of Supervisors yet.
Fantastic. And Larry, you'll be able to get us those dates. Walter, I mean, don't want to.
No problem.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you so much. I know these are tough questions.
What was that question, Sarah, about?
The dates when the Sports Council or the Sports Tourism Task Force is meeting, so we can get someone from the Sports Tourism group, like Jeremy Lee or someone like that, to maybe participate.
Yeah, I think the Sports Tourism Task Force, that they're done with their work, correct, Walter?
Actually, Larry, I'm not sure. I don't know. I know they haven't been active lately, but I don't know if they're just in hiatus or if they're done. They may well be done.
All right, well, I'll find out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I believe the final report was issued either late 2019 or 2020. So, and they've offered a selection of different levels of development. But I think everybody should recognize it, as you've already stated, Walter, it is to benefit the entire county, and it will largely be it will be a fee-driven facility, because the Park Authority is a fee-driven authority within the county. 75% of its budget is based on the fees that it can charge.
Yeah, Bob, that's a good point. I think it's also true that there's some discussion about equity issues in that approach. Certainly, certain facilities at Lake Fairfax are open to, the public at no charge, but others aren't.
Right.
And I'll just comment that, in terms of where I hear most of the activity around the Sports Tourism Task Force is in the southern part of the county. Pat Harity's, really working on some projects that were recommended. And probably the most visible one is in the Mount Vernon district. It's the proposed indoor ski facility on the old landfill property. And that's basically, that's got a lot of support from Dan Stork, the Mount Vernon supervisor. I've raised some concerns about that one from a carbon footprint standpoint. I mean, we're really having these serious discussions about, really going all out to, go electric buses and retrofitting county facilities to be more energy efficient. And, then we're facilitating the creation of indoor snow in July. So it's like, all right, maybe, but we probably need to rethink that a little bit, or at least they need to show us how they're going to go carbon neutral on that. But we'll see.
Okay, well, moving right along.
Sorry, Larry, I'm not being silent.
No, absolutely no. We welcome your comments. Where I was on the number of ball fields, and the original recommendation that there be 12 new fields for the existing demand, as opposed to future demand created by development of the TSAs and elsewhere. And so that question is still going to be debated at the task force, I believe. There's a new section on parkways and greenways, looking at Reston Parkway, Sunrise Valley Drive, for instance, and what can be done to enhance those so that they truly are more like parkways and serve in a multimodal sense. I think there may be some difficulties with that, with adjoining private property and the width of the rights of way, but that's something that I think the community needs to discuss. The last one here, which is something that has come up, is, how do we incorporate language so that, and I'll just be really blunt about this here with Walter on the call, that makes it easier for the county staff to recognize that contributions to RA, even though we are a private corporation, but we operate a lot of, just use a really technical term, stuff in the public realm, pathways, underpasses, overpasses, and the like. And so we own and operate those things for the benefit of the entire Reston community, whether they're RA members or not. So that's something that I know we've had some discussion about, and we'll probably continue to have discussion about. So those are the major components from the Parks and Open Space piece that we wanted to bring to the board's attention. And if there aren't any other questions, we will move on to the next section.
One quick question before we move on, and I think we talked about it, Don and Larry, about, do we want to advocate for some of the proffers to benefit RA? Since we are in the public realm, we do serve, our trails are used by everyone far and wide. So is that, again, something as a board we want to advocate for?
Are you asking me directly? Or are you asking the other board members?
The other board members, I was just mentioning that we did discuss it briefly. I would like to see if the others feel the same way, or should we get some, I don't know if it's proffers or county assistance in paying for these RA facilities that are being used. And there's no way for us to sort of monitor the use, right? Whether it's our members or it's to the public. And we're proud of these. All the developers use them to brag about RA in Reston. So is that something we should, as Reston Association, maybe have that conversation?
Absolutely. That's a very simple, direct response. The thing that we need guidance on is how to effectively get that done, as opposed to, yeah, we can go beat on the doors, but if they don't open, all we have are sore knuckles. So how do we effectively make our case?
Yes.
Yeah, Bob, it's Walter. I think you're onto something there, and I think there may be some ways to open those doors, because I know generally Fairfax County and Department of Planning and Development staff and the county attorney's office, they're hesitant to basically they're hesitant to support proffers basically taking from one private entity to give to another. But there may be some ways where there can be a nexus created, between development and nearby facilities that are RA owned and in the public realm virtually, where we might be able to move in that direction, Bob. So thank you for your comment.
Thanks.
Thank you, Walter.
So we ready to move on? There's other questions on the parks and open space?
Larry, before we move on, we've had to change our lineup a bit here. Jennifer's no longer on the call. And so what I would like to do is put two slides before, yes, put two slides before the energy and environment presentation. And so I would like to start with Gary Maupin, who will do a very brief discussion of the economic development chapter that's under development. And then I will go to Michelle Kimmel to give a presentation on the equity and community health presentation. And then we'll return to regular order and do energy and environment. You okay with that, Larry?
I'm fine with that, sure. So Christina, if you could go down to the economic development slide. Thank you. And Gary, I presume on the call?
Yes.
Yes, you caught me slightly off guard because I thought Michelle was going to go before me, but this is fine. I'm working on economic development and I'm coordinating with Charles Kapoor, the CEO of the Reston Chamber of Commerce, and others. I've talked to John Carter a good bit and met with him and as well as Charles Kapoor a number of times. And this is just a list that you're seeing on the screen of issues that we're looking at. There's a little expanded set of topics that I'm trying to cut down from to make it a little simpler here. But the bottom line is trying to make Reston an attractive place for businesses in concert with all the other things in Reston, and selling Reston as a great place to do business and to live and play, to be simple about it. So it's in concert with everything else. It's also in concert with the policy plan related to economic development of the county comprehensive plan policy. In addition to that, being in concert with the Department of Economic Initiatives in the county and others, here in Reston. So we're working on that, starting off here not too long ago, and have a little draft that's filtering with just a couple of people here, and also coordinating with the equity section. I've talked to Michelle. We have a meeting with that group on Thursday. So I have one more thing to ask about this, but it's really in this context. The other thing is trying to generate some real excitement about Reston as a whole, regardless of whether it's in business or living here. And finally, I think being in concert with the comprehensive plan itself, maybe creating a little excitement for that in the county. So maybe I'll ask for a couple of questions before going on for a request I have about this relating to something Michelle and I talked about.
Are there any questions for Gary?
I don't know if that's good or bad. But one of the things that when I was arranging to have a conversation with the equity team that Michelle brought up is, gee, we really need to promote Reston, especially for businesses in you know, an enhanced way. And she brought up, gee, we need a website. And I will have to say that website is not a direct relationship to us, but it's a great, great website from Houston, Texas. And it just shows you what you can do with that kind of approach. It's been a big winner for Houston. So I've talked about that among a few people, including Charles today, as well as John Carter. And people are pretty excited about Michelle's idea, but it requires coordination with, obviously, Reston Association, Reston Town Center Association, and the county, and obviously Supervisor Alcorn. So what I would really like to do is kind of ask so we can have some authority with this, and volunteering Michelle to help me a little bit on this as we work through this, to put it in the comprehensive plan, but also to kind of move forward as, you know, in a kind of a rapid way, is for the board to really consider taking a first step with this. We don't know who would run this. It might be the chamber. I think that's kind of their natural thing to do in this situation, but obviously has to coordinate with the Reston Association, Reston Town Center Association, the county, and maybe some other organizations, obviously like the Reston Citizens Association. So if I might suggest that this would create a lot of excitement for Reston if we could move forward and kind of flesh this idea out. So I'm kind of springing this on you here, but you know, I'm on here and things have just occurred in the last, you know, I don't know, 28 hours or so. So if I might ask for your thoughts and comments on that, John and company.
Gary, probably a helpful way to do this is if you could write this up in and the parameters of what you're thinking about and the role that you are thinking of inviting RA to play. If you could put that in a mail, in an email, and send it to me, I'll make sure that it gets to the proper, or send it to Larry, and he'll make sure that the proper people in RA administration get a chance to look at it. But by all means, copy me on it, would you?
Yeah, I'll do that. I guess I think it needs kind of the board to at least let us go talk about that RAs really would consider participating in that. Doesn't mean you have to lead it, but you have to participate, provide data, maybe some resources and so forth. So the faster, you know, you can move on as a board, the better off, I think, looking at the big picture for Reston, it's a positive thing in not only the economic development chapter of the comprehensive plan, but moving forward with us and the county in concert and making Reston an exciting place, as John Carter even said to me today. So
okay.
I'll do that, but maybe I'll copy the board on it as well, John.
Thank you, Gary.
Can I add one thing on the concept? Because it just, if I may, I think what we would like to do too is really highlight two of the, you know, founding principles of Reston, you know, our commitment to diversity and equity, and also our commitment to the natural environment, and the fact that we're a biophilic city. And so if we had a website to really spotlight that we offer a lot to employers from the standpoint of both their shareholders and their boards, who want to see a number of corporations doing more to fight climate change and to promote diversity, but also as a benefit to employees. I mean, Reston is a really great place to live, and if you have the privilege to work here as well, it makes it a wonderful place. So that's a benefit that I think employers in a competitive job market can really use to their advantage.
And I'll just, thanks for, jumping in there, because she's extremely articulate on this, and this is her idea. And Charles Kapoor almost said exactly the same thing today. So I think there's a lot of people in sync on this. And, enhancing Reston's desirability from all the perspectives that Michelle just mentioned could really be a positive thing. And it's a difficult environment everybody's in, in the area here and in the county and DMV and worldwide, and we want to sell Reston. So I don't know how much more I can add to what Michelle just pointed out.
Okay, thank you, Gary, and we'll hear from Michelle shortly. Any questions for Gary from the board?
I have a quick question. First, I completely agree. Charles is amazing, and of all his special qualities, one is his wife and I share the same first name. But apart from that, I have a quick question about when we're talking about number 9, protect employment sites like traditional office parks and village centers. And then a few slides before, Larry, we were talking about possible redevelopment. So are these, I'm assuming we're talking to each other as we're writing these chapters, because we don't want them to be contradicting?
Yeah, can I jump in and say yes?
Sure.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the things. I don't know that that's on the items that are, I kind of sent in as topics, but that is one of the items that talking about how to do exactly what you just said. The other thing, as I heard you earlier talking about Singapore, I don't think we're going to make Singapore status, but we're trying to be in moving in those kind of directions and looking at other areas across the country, as well as, the superstar in Singapore. So, yeah, we're trying to protect and look forward at the same time.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I know Singapore is easy because it's tiny.
Yeah, but it's been a great job for 60 years and more. So,
yeah. Thank you, Gary.
John, we want to move on then?
Yes, let's move on to Michelle.
Sure. Okay, so
let's Christina, this would be the equity and community health slide. Slide, what is it?
She's got it.
Okay.
Okay, so equity and community health, they're two closely related but separate chapters that we'll be adding. And they really are, when you think about it, the founding principles of Reston, but somewhere along the way, they got dropped and were not included in the comprehensive plan. And so we noticed that, and we noticed that to really achieve the live, work, play motto, you have to focus on both of these concepts, and you have to make sure that they're interwoven throughout the plan for the community. And so specifically with equity, our focus here was to first start by providing an overview of where we think the guiding principles for each individual chapter and how we can better incorporate equity into those chapters, and to review the language that was used previously and really ask if we're promoting equity and removing barriers that hold communities back and neighborhoods back, or if we're continuing with the same system. And this is, I think, highlighted with the introduction of the development within the TSA. We've had, all of this effort put into the TSA, and then the majority of the housing is just completely out of reach for moderate to low income households. And so you have the area closest to economic development, closest to growth, closest to opportunity, and it is physically shut off from neighborhoods and households that need it the most. And so what we wanted to do was really go back to the founding principles and ask if we're building a community that doesn't just put affordable housing in one section and do a box checking, but incorporates all different economic, socioeconomic categories throughout the community so that we can have one vibrant community. And so that's the general focus on equity, but it comes from the point too of the One Fairfax policy, which I think has, if you haven't reviewed it, I highly suggest that you do. There's a lot in there that's just really excellent. But it states, for us to compete in the global economy, it is vital to help people reach their highest level of personal achievement. Not only does it create greater economic security for families, but also it generates increased business revenues and jobs. To put it as simply as possible, we have to all have the opportunities to succeed for our community to succeed. And this directly relates to land use in every chapter you've heard, because too often the focus on investment and improvements are in areas that already have access to so much. And so just quickly on the equity front, very quickly to define equity, this is how One Fairfax defines equity. It is the commitment to promote fairness and justice and the formation of public policy that results in all residents, regardless of age, race, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, national origin, marital status, disability, socioeconomic status, or neighborhood of residence or other characteristics, having opportunity to fully participate in the region's economic vitality, contribute to its readiness for the future, and connect to its assets and its resources. I mean, that is the founding of Reston. Almost, you can't capture that better. But again, I feel like in so much of what we've done recently, we've lost the way. And so both what we're trying to do here is highlight our history of commitment to equity and also realign our principles and our priorities. And so what we've done is we've gone through each chapter, and again, we've provided some guidance as the first step on this is what an equity-focused plan would consider, and these are the principles that should be considered. And then what we've done too, or what we hope to do afterwards, is once we review the chapters and see how they've incorporated this language, see if there's still some room for improvement, or see if they've also come up with some ideas that we hadn't have even considered. And so we're really aiming with equity both to highlight this in the beginning, but see it as an interwoven component throughout the plan. And so we focused on both. One thing that's very important is on the engagement of the community in all stages of planning. We're looking at our our plan for quality built and natural environment that supports community resiliency. And a continued effort to provide a range of housing types. And this is also, related to the PRC to really protect the PRC, because that's such a unique way of developing land where we have all different types of housing and all different socioeconomic backgrounds mixed in together as one community. What we're looking with affordable housing is, there's some who think we've lost our chance in the TSA and that it's already been approved. I think some are also hopeful that maybe with amendments that come back, we can get some in, but certainly a priority will be on preserving and maintaining the current inventory of affordable housing. We're also working with Gary, as you heard, on economic development, and we have some ideas for encouraging and promoting workforce diversity. And when we're looking at transportation, that came up today, which was great. One thing that, to go on that very micro level that Sarah mentioned, there's some areas in Reston that just need sidewalks to connect. And so if we can work with county staff to first highlight some areas that we see have problems, but then also work with them to put together a priority list and to get the data on where in our communities do we have a need and how do we prioritize investment and development, investment from development in those areas. Let's see.
Michelle, excuse me, I'm really sorry to be interrupting you, but we are currently without quorum. So I am going to call a bio break so we can see if we can rustle up another board member so we can continue this meeting. So if everybody would bear with us, we're going to take 5. And
we have 5 members.
Oh, Bob, you are here?
I've been on here. I've been on all. I've had to change computers. I've been on all the time.
All right. We didn't think you were with us at the moment.
I sent a message to Christina.
Oh, okay. Never mind then. Michelle, you may continue. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Let's see. You'll hear more about the environment coming up, but one component that we're really hoping to further flesh out in the plan is the Green Neighborhoods Initiative that creates strong, just, and resilient communities, and that partners with communities to ensure that underserved and underrepresented communities have the building blocks to have better living and higher quality, environmentally sustainable lives. Let's see. Okay. Also on parks and recreation facility, there we are, I have to add one thing on Barron Cameron. Right now we have a facility that is open to the public. And so the whole community, and if we lose that to sports tourism, that is a net loss. That is not just, it's not like there's nothing there. There is something that is used by families, including families that cannot afford to pay to join the sports leagues. So, those are important constituencies, but I hope we do also keep in mind that some sports leagues are incredibly expensive. Okay, let's see. And this is one too where we get at the, Larry mentioned that we just really aren't seeing the parks in the TSA. What we see are some pocket parks maybe, but sometimes those are also just walkways. But it's not the Reston vision of really being able to live and, or play where you live. And so that means that a lot of the use that new residents will have will fall on other areas. And so we hope that, especially with some places in South Reston, that we can see greater investment in the parks in South Reston that really need improvement. I mean, South Lakes Drive Park, there's holes in the soccer goals, the nets, and they're falling apart. And it would just be great if we could see investment in other areas than typically receive it.
Michelle, I'm wondering if you could finish up the equity and get into the community health, because we do need to keep track with the rest of the program too.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's really the next chapter is on community health. And so this ties in with equity and will be incredibly equity focused. But with the new chapter on community health, we're really looking to talk about the health of the entire community. And so this is ensuring that, we have a healthcare system that can serve all, that we have resilient food systems, and that we have accessible public open space for community engagement. One of the things that we talk about too is that we would like to see greater access to Wi-Fi and broadband, and provided at an affordable cost, or hopefully at government facilities for free. What we're really looking at too is when we're talking about the buildings that will be built, it's an incorporation of healthy building design elements. And there are a few different designations that are available for healthy building designs, and also some principles that some folks at Harvard have been working on. So on the community health, it's very broad. We are talking about, the ability of residents to live a healthy life in Reston. And I think this is what sets Reston apart. So we're excited to add this chapter to the plan. And I think this will really touch on all that RA facilities and our RA homes really offer, because we offer such access to that ability. So that's what I've got. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And as Supervisor Alcorn has pointed out, this is something that the county has wanted to do. And it turns out that Reston may be taking the place of leading the way on this. So thank you very much for your work and the work of your committee, Michelle. Any questions from the board for Michelle?
I have some comments. I'm sorry, let somebody else go first. And if there's no other questions, I can add my comments. Okay, if nobody, then I'll go, John. A few questions, Michelle, that since we have possibly Walter and some of the county staff, I know you bring up a lot of great points here. I'm wondering if there are a few things that we could do and maybe have it in the comp plan. One is, you talked about healthy buildings, looking at things like a green roof. And I know as Reston Strong, we've actually reached out to Walter's office on that topic. But community buildings like the police or the fire department having green roofs would be a huge step in setting the standard for the rest of us. And I know technology has changed a lot in the past, and so it's a lot easier and it's not as restrictive as before. So those are small things. Again, Larry and I, we've talked about the Baron Cameron facility actually having a park on the roof. And I know, Larry, you wanted a brewery there, but at least, a park, if we're losing the open space, those sort of alternatives that can be explored.
Green roofs will definitely be included. And I think that will also be probably coming up when Tammy talks about the environment chapter as well. This is something that comes up in Reston planning and zoning quite a bit too. Yeah.
And the other piece when you were talking about a healthy food system is I wonder if as a county level, we could address food waste. I know places like Paris have laws where you cannot actually throw out food. Unfortunately, and I've had long drawn out arguments with Safeway staff when they throw out their food that's barely expired, when there are tons, and they wouldn't even give it to me to feed the rescue dogs. So if there's a way the county could work with local businesses on, there's a huge movement on this trash food At least I don't see any Restonians jumping in the trash cans yet. But maybe this is something the county or the comp plan we can explore about the food waste. Just putting it out there.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay. And the last one, I think you did mention, Michelle, about free Wi-Fi. One of the issues with free Wi-Fi is also access to systems. If we're looking at an equity standpoint, we work on the homelessness issue again. And a lot of people say, oh, you can find all that info on our website. The piece we miss is when someone's homeless, they don't necessarily have a device to get to our websites. So if all public facilities had access to computers that anybody could walk in and get information, that'd be great.
That's a really great point, Sarah. And to somewhat tie into it also, one topic that we talked a lot about was also removing language barriers. And I'm hopeful this is something RA takes on, where we're really presenting the facilities or the services that are offered to multiple audiences, not just English speaking audiences. So there's a lot that we can do. Yeah.
I will tell you, Karen's working with Mike Leone on that. I think we're getting some language translations. Yes.
Yep, working on
it. Working it, yes. We're working on it.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Michelle? Okay. Larry, where do we go next?
So I think I see Tammy is now on. So Tammy, if you could do 5 to 7 minute overview of the slide that we're going to put up here, just the kind of the high level things that the RA board maybe should consider with respect to the energy environment piece that you and Bill Penniman have been working on. You're on mute right now.
Thank you. I'm finally able to unmute myself. I will try to be short and sweet. Walter, you can relax. He always has a tight chest when I talk because God knows what's going to come out. I'm remarkably candid. We are approaching the environment and energy chapter from the position that Reston will be a leader in Fairfax County as a biophilic community on pressing as hard as we can for as much as we can, and sometimes above what the county standards require, because we firmly believe as a biophilic community that if we do not stop and ameliorate climate change, there is no amount of money anywhere that can buy us out of it. Before I talk about this, I want to just thank profusely the 2 volunteer RA board members that are working their guts out to help write a good plan. And that is Jennifer Juszczuk and John Mooney. Larry has been invaluable. He is a paid person by RA, so he is not a volunteer. However, he is the community historian as far as, what watershed and whatever. And we so appreciate his expertise as well. So I'm not going to talk about biophilic principles because you have Doug Britt and his EAC committee, Environmental Action Committee, for those not familiar with the acronyms of RA, who are phenomenal environmentalists and to the core devoted to this. And you have heard the Razor report. So let me just say that this chapter was written and reviewed by Doug Britt, who was the main RA proponent of our biophilic, Reston's biophilic application a couple years ago that was approved. Being a biophilic community is an astonishing feat, and we're very proud of it and hope to expand upon it. Let's see. All of the things, one thing we're trying to get, read the list. I don't need to read them to you. Green roofs, for sure. I heard that mentioned by Sarah and Michelle. That's huge. I would prefer that you all ask me questions. If you have any questions, our chapter's in draft form. The noise attenuation is incorrect. Bill Penniman put that in from the existing plan, and I don't believe those numbers about the dBAs are accurate, so that will be changed. The light pollution came directly from the Razor report and Doug Britt's verbiage. And what else would you like to know? Do you have any questions? I don't want to natter on about things you already know about. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Tammy, thank you very much. It may be good for you to point out just a few more things on the strong position we're taking on stormwater management. And secondly, the green technology standards we're urging the county to enforce in buildings. So I believe it's gold for residential and
platinum for commercial.
So
right.
Can you talk just a bit about that?
Okay. Yes, as I mentioned, we are trying to up the standards and be radical Reston and do things that other districts and communities do not do. Walter, thank heaven, has supported this, and if he'll support it at the end is his decision, but we're going to go for it and see. The currently silver is required for buildings in Reston. That is not acceptable. That's easy to do. We're way past needing more. And so gold for residential is thought to be a step up. And platinum, I was surprised at this, platinum for commercial. Turns out getting a platinum commercial building is a lot easier than it would appear, because the build outs inside the building do not count for the platinum of the building itself. So that's my understanding. You had a bunch of questions earlier, John Mooney. The stormwater management, I will say we have a problem, one specific problem in Reston, and I would like information from this group. Has anybody ever been flooded on Wheelie Avenue between the South North Shore Loop and Sunset Hills? John Carter brought that up last night. I am not familiar with there ever being a problem with that, but if there is, we need to address it. We all know about the crazy VDOT flooding on Sunset Hills, just west of Isaac Newton Square. And that is a huge problem in that the county has, without the knowledge of many people, come up with an idea of putting a 4-acre retention basin on Hidden Creek Country Club. This is not acceptable to the community or anybody I've talked to. I am sure that the Isaac Newton property owners would not like it. And for sure, Golf Course Overlook, which is an approved but not yet built project just to the south of that, would not like it. So I'm boggled that ever went through. Basins are not the current technology for handling stormwater. So, and in addition, it promotes the weakness of the golf course to have 18 holes there. So why would you do that when we're desperately trying to protect the golf course? So that is just, that gives me great heartburn, and that has to be stopped. We have sent letters to the engineer. The engineer comes back, we're not changing it. That's shocking to me. I'm a taxpayer. Other people who wrote in are taxpayers. Why wouldn't you want to accommodate the community with a better solution when the water that's flooding is from upstream, and you're going to punish Hidden Creek that we're trying to protect? So there's a lot of crazy politics going on there that has to be, you need to be alert to. And
Tammy, this is Walter. I'm happy to have a town hall on that topic. You know, I heard it discussed the other night, and we'll get the stormwater engineers and frankly, if RA wants to participate, happy.
yeah, and we had a private engineer look at it and come up with a solution fairly easily. So it's like, you know, no, we studied it, it's in engineering and yada yada. So yeah, that
Okay.
would be, we would appreciate that, Walter.
Okay, thanks, Tammy.
I don't want to natter on. Are there any questions that anyone has?
I do have a question, but more for Larry, Tammy on that topic. Larry, would we, since Hidden Creek is our covenanted RA land, would we have any say at all on what the best practice is when it comes to flood mitigation and what they're doing?
Well, we'd have to go through the design review board. First and foremost, I don't know if RA would, necessarily challenge the engineering. We would have to hire our own engineers to debate that, and that, quite frankly, isn't we haven't done that in the past, I will say. But it does have to go through the design review board, and so there would be, lots of discussion at that level.
This would be something, as an example, as a board, we would want to take a stance on, right? So you have some direction when you go to these meetings, or feel free to tell us if you've got it and you know what you're doing, and I'll shut up.
Well, yeah, it's really a question of if the board would want to take a stance. The fundamental problem down there is yeah, the water's coming from upstream, but the problem is a 100-year-old culvert under the WNOD that doesn't allow enough flow through. And so what the county has recommended is to put in a pipe that can actually carry the flow to prevent the flooding, but then to prevent flooding downstream to ameliorate that. And their current proposal is to do that through a pond and wetland system on the Hidden Creek property. The fundamental problem with the flooding is, yes, there's water upstream that was built pre-code, and the choke point is this dry stack stone culvert under the WNOD. And I've seen the video on it. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and Larry, I know some of the upstream watershed is RA property, so welcome RA's participation in finding a solution.
And to that point, Larry, the flooding comes before the WOND because it washes over the top of Sunset Hills and then goes onto the VDOT slanted slope to the west parking lot. How cars float and flood up to their windows on a slope, I will never understand, but we'll have a town hall and we can see that video. But anyway, thank you for your history on that. Anybody else?
Thank you very much, Tammy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for jumping in.
So, Chris Daniel, the next slide is on heritage resources. Christina, could we have that come up, please?
So, John, can I just add one point before we move to the next slide?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm delaying the whole thing. There are communities that get LEED certification as a community. So there are cities that have gotten different levels of LEED certification. As an aspirational piece, Tammy, could the environmental chapter look at Reston pursuing something like that? Since we already have biophilic, it should be pretty straightforward for us to get something.
We're putting it in the plan, Sarah. The issue is, will the Board of Supervisors approve it? And that is, it can be done. That's not an issue. Gold and platinum buildings, we have 2 platinum buildings in Reston already. It's not that it can't be done. I will tell you from sitting on the P&Z, spending 1 penny extra is a hell no to developers. So to get them to agree, I said last night, this community on this call is working like crazy to abate climate change. And at the same meeting, we have a developers rep campaigning for more density and not saying one thing about a bigger park space, more trees, or how the developers are going to chime in and help us combat climate change. Oh, but wait a minute. The two priorities the county has said, the Board of Supervisors have said, are combating climate change and helping equity. So Reston is pushing both of those big time in our comp plan, hoping that we will be allowed to do this, allowed to help save our community and our region, and that more communities will buy into this and developers will catch the clue that it's not optional. We are in a crisis, and if we don't fix this, we are going to pollute our watersheds, et cetera, and we won't have a community or a county worth living in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Walter, is there a way we can find a happy middle ground?
I'm here to represent the residents of Reston and Hunter Mill District, so I'll do my best.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you.
Okay. If we can keep moving now to the heritage resources, I'll be very brief on that. Chris Daniel, who's the author of that, had to leave our meeting tonight, and he wrote these bullet points, and he wrote a very, very fine 5-page summary, I believe, of this fuller discussion of it, which I highly recommend. But so he says, take a holistic and forward-looking heritage approach. So looking at everything, because some of it's past history, but Chris is saying, let's be aware to those buildings which, as decades pass, themselves will become heritage principles. And he would like to see us improve the quality of our architecture in Reston so that we are today building what will be heritage buildings in the future. Secondly, he summarizes pretty much everything we know about heritage resources within Reston, or he gives references for those wanting more granular information. He has a map. The third point, he lists all of the earlier Reston surveys done with a map of heritage resources. He points out that future development proposals where land is disturbed or old buildings are torn down to build new ones, those very activities will reveal yet unidentified heritage resources. There is, for example, a Drainesville Civil War battlefield in our planning area, and that has not been fully explored. So as development happens, we will probably discover new heritage resources. And finally, Lake Ann Historic Overlay District is the only district that is part of the Fairfax County zoning ordinance. And so, and that alone has certain protections. So he's asking for guidance in developing ways of protecting other heritage properties that are not historic overlay districts. So I'll leave it at that. I recommend Chris's chapter, which is, as I say, very short but excellently written. Any questions on this, or does the board want to take any positions on any of these issues?
John, before that, if I could just mention one thing that I found actually quite interesting in what Chris drafted, and this was the one he acknowledged that he kind of threw it in there, was the notion of somehow or perhaps incentivizing the development community to do preservation. So in other words, if there's a heritage resource building on a particular site, that if they choose to save that building in its current form, or or repurpose it, but essentially keep the architecture and form of the building, to possibly incentivize the developers. And I'll just, this is what he was implying. I don't know if he said it exactly like this, with perhaps a density bonus or something like that, so that, there was merit in actually preserving it. So I thought that was a really interesting notion.
Yeah, indeed he does. He proposes an increase in FAR, which is floor area ratio, which basically is a measure of density on a site. So that is an interesting proposal to incentivize historic preservation in private development. We're always cautious appropriately at increasing density without carefully assessing the effects. So, but it's a fascinating proposal, and he knew it was a bit pushing the envelope. So, thanks for mentioning that, Larry. Any questions?
I'm just wondering, are there other ways to incentivize without giving up density, or is that me being too naive?
Unfortunately, Chris isn't here to answer those questions. He's pretty familiar with that with respect to any potential, tax credits for preservation and things like that. It is absolutely not my wheelhouse, but
nor mine.
Other methods.
Yeah, and Larry, I'll just jump in real quick. It's Walter. At a high level, Virginia is still very much a property rights state. So, it's typically something that local or state government is not in a position to, just say no on, frankly, they can tear it down. Usually they can redevelop it. So it ends up being more of a collaborative thing in Virginia, at least.
As with the API building.
Yeah, and certainly with that one, there was the county did approve the rezoning that facilitated that one, but that's right, John.
Any other questions on heritage resources? Okay. If not, are there any general board questions or questions from general members who are listening in? If you would identify yourself if you have any questions or comments, I'd appreciate it. Or Walter, and then Walter, if you have any concluding statements you'd like to make after we test for comments here from others. Board members?
I think I see a hand raised.
Michelle's hand is up.
Michelle?
Sure. Hi. So, one thing that I think you mentioned, John, is that, tonight the board can't provide guidance, but if I may be so bold to ask that part of the guidance be a recommitment to our founding principles, and also an expectation that the plan will honor those and will ensure that all residents of Reston can continue to live, work, and play in Reston. I just think that that's a huge thing that just needs to be reincorporated. And I think it would be incredibly strong if we had RA out there committed to those founding principles and really taking a strong stance and a commitment to promoting equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And by they can't give us guidance, I mean they cannot give directives. Only a formal board vote can do that. But certainly we know that we who represent RA on the task force know that we are to promote exactly those values which are central to Reston.
So we can't make a motion tonight. Is that what you're saying, John?
I get Tony.
Tony, are you here?
I'm here.
Could I make a motion that we, of course, I'll find the words again, what Michelle said. And could we pass that as a motion since we have quorum, or are we not allowed to?
Looking at the That's a discussion slash action item. We have quorum. There was sufficient notice. I don't see any reason that you couldn't take up action.
It's on there as discussion and action, so I don't see why we couldn't either.
Karen, you want to make that motion? Because I don't remember. All I have is, I was trying to write as fast as I could while Michelle was saying it.
I mean, I jotted down, that we are
Recommitting to our
committing to uphold our guiding principles and equity. And Michelle, do you want to repeat what you said?
Or can you put it in chat for us? I can read it out.
Yeah, and I think you could also use part of the One Fairfax policy. Always good to copy and paste when possible, right? Let me see if I can pull that up to help with language. Of course, now my computer's slow.
I think that we are committed to upholding the founding principles of Reston in this new comp plan. Does that say enough?
And ensuring that all residents can live, work, and play in Reston.
Okay.
There's a piece on equity.
Yeah. I think we could say, let's see.
The Reston strong piece has to come out, right? I have to find equity and everything.
We're committed to ensuring, I don't know if that's too many things.
How about to ensure equity and that all of our residents can continue to live, work, and play?
How about promoting equity and creating greater economic security for families in Reston? Maybe that, or.
And you want to get the live, work, and play in there.
And the context of this is in the comprehensive plan, correct?
Right.
So Tony, you got that motion, right?
Sort of.
Well, it's been recorded and Christina probably has it.
I'm happy to make the motion if somebody wants to second.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Was that all five of us?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
If there are no other questions from board members or from general members, I'll pause to see if there are.
John, did you have any other expectations of us as the board tonight?
Larry and I and other presenters tried to point out the issues that are the more difficult issues that we'll be facing. You didn't have to take, we wanted you to be aware of those. If you felt strongly enough to give us guidance on those, we would have welcomed it, but and we got some guidance, but at least you know the background so that if we have to make a more pointed decision, we can come back quickly to the board. You will now have the background in order to against which you can assess the issue we're bringing to you.
Do you have any few like KDPs that you want our response on, like redevelopment at village centers? Are we as RA saying yes or no? Are we like what stance we're taking on those things? And maybe it could come to the full board in June?
We can certainly bring them to the board. We will continue to apprise the board of what's happening. I think the general direction of the task, I know the general direction of the task force is to reduce some of the densities that were ill-advised in the previous plan. And I think the board clearly has indicated its support for that. So we will continue to support that within the task force.
Thank you.
Walter, would you like to make, if there are no other comments from board members or general members, Walter, would you like to offer any reflections at the end?
Yeah, just two quick things. One, this is by no means the last opportunity for RA to weigh in. As it actually is a great opportunity, and I think you're taking advantage of that. There will be in the fall basically a series of public meetings, and I'll be seeking public input. Frankly, I'd be happy if you want to do a joint meeting at some point, with the package of recommendations. That would be great. Be happy to do that.
I think that's a fantastic idea. While we have you, can I ask Hank if we can look at dates, please, to do that together? I don't know if Hank is still here, but Larry, you got that?
We can look at dates.
Walter, do we already know when that would be, or do we need to wait? Do we
There's a
need
vending
to?
machine that might have bottled
Yeah,
water.
John, I think you're right. I think we need to wait until, I think let's wait at least a few weeks on that, just because we need to make sure that the task force wraps up when I'm hoping the task force will wrap up. But if that goes into August or any later, then we might have to adjust. So I am definitely looking at sometime in the fall, but happy to coordinate. And by the way, Amanda from my office would have to help me with that because controls my schedule in a good way.
Thank you, Walter. Any other reflections from you?
Yeah, and this is the more important one perhaps, which is I just want to give a huge thank you to RA for all the time that John has put into this task force, that Jennifer has put in, and Larry. I mean, not only have we had, John, what do we had? 25 task force meetings? Or
23 as of yesterday.
All right, 23. I'm jumping ahead.
That's just the task force.
I was going to say that does not count the transportation subgroups, that meetings that John has chaired and led, and the dozens of other calls and meetings in between, to try to work through these things. And I cannot thank you all enough for your participation. I mean, this really is. This is the only way to do this, in my opinion, is to have this level of community involvement. And I would just make one final note, which is we are still in the process of making the comprehensive plan process work for Reston, because unlike the rest of Fairfax County, Reston was created not because it was put into the comprehensive plan, but because it was rezoned. And that is actually the reverse of how the rest of Fairfax County has developed. So we still have some of that old zoning, and certainly with the PRC being the controlling instrument over much of Reston, it does make the comprehensive plan process a newer, I would say, wrinkle in Reston's land use planning activity. But it's so important whenever rezoning applications and other and PRC plans come to the Board of Supervisors to have the long-term guide for how the community, where the community consensus direction for Reston. It's so important to have that against which developer proposals can be evaluated and judged. So anyway, thank you so much for all the time and effort that you've done on this.
And thank you, Walter, for your indefatigable efforts in this and your trust in the process, in the community process.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for arranging your schedule so you could be with us tonight.
Yeah, sorry I missed the first 45 minutes, but HRI had the police chief and I had to go to that.
Ah.
Yes.
So,
Thank you, Walter, for taking the time.
I'll be hearing about
thank you,
that.
Sarah.
Madam Chair, I would
Yes,
like to move.
we have one more item, the calendar. Did you want to do that?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay.
Yeah, very quickly. You can read those dates. I don't have to read them to you. Those are the remaining dates on the calendar from June 28th through July 26th. More will be needed if and as necessary.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I just want to add my thank you to everybody who participated tonight, and also to include Jennifer, because I know she was scheduled to be a presenter tonight. I know how hard you are all working, and just to reiterate what's already been said, it's very much appreciated. All the time and effort you're putting into this. It's crucial.
The community is worth it.
Yeah. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your evening, everybody. And John and Walter, have a great vacation.
Thank you.
Not together. but-
Enjoy, everybody.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Larry, for putting this together.
Bye now.
You're welcome.
With Jennifer. Okay.
Yes,
bye now.
and with Jen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.